Thanks, Johnny, and I also want to hope you can hear me. Can you hear me all right? Thank you, Vaughn, for that presentation. As a resident of Davis County, I'm glad you're watching over my records, so thank you very much for that. I feel like they're in good hands. And this is a great backdrop. Feel free to zone out and stare at the fish. It reminds me of when I was a kid, my parents had an aquarium that my sister and I would just sit and stare at in the mornings. So I won't feel bad, but hopefully I can keep your attention talking about road liability beyond Rs2477. I think the reason for that is Rs2477 has been in the news a lot lately. It's been a huge issue with some of our counties, but there's a lot more to road liability than talking about Rs2477. I want to refer you also, before I get going, to the handout that is online. It's a PDF. It is hyperlinked so that you can hit the statutes that I'm talking about, the case law that I'm talking about. It'll take you right to them. It's in public domain, so it should take you right to the actual document if you want to follow what I'm talking about here today. My presentation is going to diverge from that a little bit, but it'll be pretty much pretty similar to what I have in that handout. So let's go ahead and get started. When we talk about road liability, oftentimes this is what comes to mind, right? Now, this isn't something that the governmental entity was responsible for, although someone probably claimed it, because you claim all sorts of things. But this was due to fog. This is down in Texas, multi-car pileup. But this is usually what we think of when we think about road liability. We usually don't think about this. This is the Lund Highway heading into Cedar City. Now, a lot of the photographs I'm going to use are photographs from state highways because I couldn't find images that were okay to use of county roads. But we have some really great roads in Utah, and just scenic, fantastic roads. And so I've got a few photographs of those today to help the time pass better. But there are issues here, though. So what I want you to sort of change in your head is when you look at this and you see dollar signs if the county's at fault. I also want you to look at this and see dollar signs if the county's at fault, because both of them can wind up costing the county a lot of money. Let's talk a little bit about how we get roads. This is Cottonwood Canyon Road down in Kane County. There are three ways that we come up with roads in Utah. The first is when counties purchase or condemn land. Now, purchasing, interestingly enough, doesn't have to be for a contemporaneous building of the road. You can also buy property to build a road if you're planning to build it within the next 30 years. So if you have a long-range plan, like you're supposed to, you set out your transportation corridors within your county, you can begin purchasing that property toward those corridors decades in advance of when you're actually going to build the road. Now, the other method, of course, condemnation. I think we're all familiar with that. I could do an entire presentation on condemnation. I'll spare you that today. The next way is through dedication. Now, oddly enough, this is actually probably the most common way currently that the counties in Utah come up with their roads, because every subdivision that gets approved has public roads going through it, and when it gets approved, those public roads then become, when it's dedicated, when the final plat is dedicated, they become county roads. We also have general plans, road maps. Those are usually guidelines. There's no obligation for the county to build those roads, but they can't build them unless they conform to the general plan. So just something to keep in mind. And then finally, we have consistent public use. What is this? Well, this is if a road is continuously used by the public for a period of 10 years, it becomes a public road. And that's, historically, that's how most of the roads in our counties have come into being. They've come into being because way back when, sometimes even when Utah was still a territory, the roads were being used by the public. They've always been used by the public, and now they're just considered to be county roads. So most of your roads are probably roads that were created through consistent public use. So let's talk a little bit about the classes of roads that we have. This is looking down on the Height Bridge in Glen Canyon. We have Class A roads, which are state roads. We have Class C roads, which are city roads. And then we have Class B roads, which are your county roads. These are all the roads outside of the municipalities in the county that are designated by the county executive as county roads. The county owns them in joint title with the state. So they are owned by both the state and the county, but the sole jurisdiction of these roads is the counties, all right? And then we also have Class D roads. And I say these are county roads, but I say that with a question mark. These are strange roads. They're all public roads outside the municipal boundaries that are not designated as county roads. However, the title in those roads is in the state and the county has jurisdiction over them. So go figure. They're county roads that aren't designated as county roads, essentially. So that's what Class D roads are. They're scribed on state maps. I think this came into being around the time that the Rs2477 issue sort of erupted. These are often just dirt roads that are not maintained, but are nonetheless considered county roads. And as I understand it, I've been told, although I haven't been able to confirm it in the statutes, that there's a difference in funding between the two, where you receive state funding to maintain Class Bs, but not Class Ds. So that is the main distinction there. Now, county roads, whether they're Class B or Class D, can pass through municipalities, and those are still county roads where they go through municipalities. However, where they're going through the municipality, the law that applies to the road within the boundaries of the municipality is the municipality's laws. So they set the speed limits, they apply the law there, but still nonetheless, still is within the county's, otherwise within the county's jurisdiction. We also have temporary right-of-ways over state lands. This came about in 1992. The state said, okay, all the roads that go across state lands, those are now county roads if they existed prior to the passage of that act, which occurred in 1992. However, the counties were supposed to apply to determine the status of those roads to the state. I don't know how many counties have done that. I suspect very few have, because there's really no upside and only a downside to doing that, because there are different standards of proof you're going to have to use if you want a permanent easement on that road going over state land. So for example, if it's Sitla land, Sitla has a mandate to make money for its fund that funds the public schools. So if the road, making the road a county road, doesn't fit that mandate, you don't get a permanent easement on that road. So there's really no impetus for the counties to go through this process of trying to get permanent easements established across state lands, where their roads cross the state lands. And I doubt many of you have done it since 1992. I could be wrong. Yes?
The counties are purchasing those easements across state land now.
Okay.
From Sitla.
From Sitla.
Yeah, so that they can maintain.
Their mandate. Okay.
Actually, we're actually doing that through the Community Impact Board.
Oh.
And getting the funds there. Community Impact Board has determined in a lot of those cases, because those roads have value for extracting minerals and so forth.
That makes sense.
They want to maintain, because Sitla may sell that section to somebody who doesn't want that road anymore.
Right.
The county has an interest in it, so the counties are purchasing. They purchased nearly all of the B road easements, and now they're going to look at purchasing the A road.
Okay. Okay, so I don't know if you all heard that, but apparently some counties at least are buying. You think all of them are buying, purchasing the easements across the state lands, even from Sitla, because if you pay Sitla for it, then they satisfy the mandate.
Well, that's the only ones they're purchasing is the ones across Sitla.
Yes, because the other ones you can just get a dedication from the state. Okay, great. So, and roads exist until they're formally vacated. Any other action that the county takes does not vacate the road unless there's an actual passage of an ordinance, a resolution, a court order. Unless there's something formal, that is still going to be considered a county road and within the county's jurisdictions. Clerks and recorders not allowed to remove a road from any of the maps in their offices unless this formality has been satisfied. When it is vacated, it vacates both the county's and the state's interests in the road, unless it's a road that was dedicated under Rs2477. If that's the case, then the state, even if the county goes through this process, the state maintains its right in the road. So what this means is that you're stuck with your roads unless you go through the formal process of getting rid of them. One thing you can do is you can temporarily close a road, but it has to be temporary. There are certain processes that you have to go through. It won't count as an abandonment if you do it formally, so you have to do it by resolution or ordinance. And you have to annually reauthorize it, and it can't last for more than 2 years. If you do that, then you run the risk of having it deemed an abandonment. And it also has to be necessary to mitigate or correct harm to nearby property. So, for example, I recently dealt with a county that had a road that they had closed, and they had it closed for a number of years. It used to go over a dump, and they didn't want anyone going down in there and continuing to dump garbage down there. They had a hard time keeping people from doing this, so they closed the road. But the problem is they kept the road closed for well beyond 2 years, so technically an argument could have been made, and thankfully it wasn't in this case. It could have been made that that road had then been abandoned and no longer, or should have no longer been considered a county road. And I don't believe it was done formally either. So this is something to keep an eye on in your counties as well. So going back to when injuries arise, I call this injury from use. This is something that is wrong with the highway or the road that causes an accident. This is the most common way this arises. So first of all, let me say that unless you can find an exception to liability within the Governmental Immunity Act, if you are responsible for whatever caused the accident, then you're likely going to be dealing with liability. You're likely going to be liable. There's likely going to be no way to avoid the liability unless you fall within an exception. This is because counties have what the courts call a non-delegable duty to exercise due care to maintain the roads in a reasonably safe condition for travel. Okay, so if there's something wrong with the road, some condition on the road that no longer makes it safe for travel, counties are responsible for that. They have a duty to that. They can't delegate that duty to anyone else. They're ultimately responsible. So then you can contract with someone to repair a road, but the duty to keep the road in a safe condition is still the county's. All right, so you still can end up being liable in a suit situation for an accident that arises from, for example, a shoddy repair job. All right. The state has waived counties' immunities for negligence and defective or dangerous conditions of the road. So if the road is in a defective condition, if it's dangerous, you have no immunity from those kinds of suits, unless you can find an exception. And there are a couple exceptions that we see frequently applied in these cases. They are the discretionary function exception and the latent defect exception. So let's look a little bit at those. So you're likely not going to avoid liability unless you fall under one of these exceptions. As I said, the most frequent ones are discretionary function and latent defect. I'm a little bit behind on my slides. Sorry about that. So let's talk about discretionary function. I'm going to go through, I listed a lot of cases in your handout. I'm going to go through a few of them and show you where the courts have rejected the defense